I'll start off. I'm Brian Watson. I'm the Director of Business Outreach for a nonprofit called Workforce Opportunity Services. Basically what we do is we provide career and educational opportunities for military veterans and underprivileged high school graduates who don't really have too many job opportunities or educational opportunities. So anybody who's interested in talking about that with me, happy to discuss after, because it really has nothing to do with this panel, but that's okay. I'm also the former editor-in-chief of CIO Insight, which is where I have most of my intelligence about this world from. And with that, I will pass it over to Adam Boyden.
Hi. Afternoon, everyone. My name's Adam Boyden. I'm president of Conduit, which is based in Silicon Valley. We're the 29th largest web property on Earth, and I guarantee none of you have ever heard of us. We run a platform which allows publishers online to build their own apps for browsers and mobile devices, and have more than 260,000 different publishers, ranging from well-known names down to no names, and through them to more than 250 million active users. Entrepreneur in background, I think this is my fourth one. Before that, I was in the gaming space with Xfire. We sold to Viacom, and before that, I did a marketplace for used vehicles, which I'm still on the board of, and used to run a consulting company in China. I started way back when. So that's me. Oh, and I stopped being an engineer a very time ago.
And Rob Laubacher.
Hi, I'm Rob Laubacher. I'm a research scientist and the Associate Director of the MIT Center for Collective Intelligence. As our name would indicate, we do research. We study the phenomenon of collective intelligence. We define this as groups of individuals doing things collectively that seem intelligent. And actually, everyone laughs because that also opens up the possibility of collective stupidity, which is a phenomenon that also exists in the world. And actually, one of our hopes is that we can begin to help understand how you get one and not the other. But in our work, we study examples of collective intelligence. We try to understand the underlying principles of collective intelligence, and we also are trying to build some new systems of our own. And so in this work, we think we've come up with some ideas that might be of use to folks who are CIOs and who are in IT organizations in large companies or in the startup world. And I'd like to share some of that with everyone today.
Great, thank you. And Andy McAfee.
Hi, I'm Andy McAfee. I'm also a research scientist and the associate director of a center at the business school at MIT. So I'm Bob's mortal enemy in the sense of the word. My center is the Center for Digital Business, and we study what technology is doing to the business world and for the business world. One of the things that it's clearly doing is opening up a lot of new possibilities that all have to do with using these weird new, I call them 2.0 tools, that give people a voice, let them come together and interact and form communities. One of the things that we notice when they do that is this fantastic phenomenon of collective intelligence. There's some other things associated with the 2.0 movement as well, which I've been thinking about, writing about, blogging about for a while. I wrote a book that came out in late 2009 called Enterprise 2.0.
Good afternoon, my name is Rob Stefanik, and I'm the CIO for Sensata Technologies. Sensata is based out of Attleboro, Massachusetts, and we are a manufacturer of sensors and control devices for aerospace, electronics, automotive, HVAC systems globally. I'm on the receiving end of the technology that Andy and his group works with. So basically, Sensata is we're a spin-off of the TI organization. We actually are relatively new. We did our IPO back in March of last year. So I'm really happy to be here and have the opportunity to speak more from a business perspective as opposed to from a research or academic standpoint of how we are trying to use collective intelligence and BI across the organization.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Rob Laubacher, your introduction was interesting. I think that we should move to have like stupidity now for next year. But I think, over the years, I think we've all heard the theories of collective intelligence. We've talked about it, perhaps maybe the New York Times headline from a couple of years ago. If you need an answer, ask everybody. Or whatever it was. Talk to us a little bit about what you think are the sort of the biggest trends in what you're seeing in your research and in your teaching in terms of collective intelligence and how it applies to organizations.
Sure, thanks. Well, obviously as I suggested earlier, by our definition, collective intelligence has been around a long time, really even before people were around. If you look at animal behavior, a lot of people talk about ants and bees. Those actually, to my mind, are less interesting examples than some of the examples of packs of mammals who work together very well. And the reason that they're less interesting is that in the insect world, there's a lot of genetic identity. A lot of the drones are clones. And in a mammal pack, you have to have people with different gene structures working together cooperatively. But the thing has been around a long time. So why are we talking about it today? The reason we're talking about it today is because of what's enabled by the internet. Internet-enabled collective intelligence, web-enabled collective intelligence is a relatively new thing. We see it beginning with examples like open source software, Wikipedia, companies like Innocentive, where you have complicated scientific and engineering problems being solved for companies by a global network of 250,000 solvers. So what's new is that this tool is this ability to marshal large numbers of people on the web is in fact a new thing. And we think that there's, it's really only been happening for about the past decade. And we think there's huge potential going forward, and it's really kind of at the beginning. And I think that for enterprises, the way we think about it is that there are, what you can begin to do now is you can begin to bring in a crowd and have a crowd of people connected by the web to do things that were formerly done by your regular organization. And sometimes this crowd is an internal crowd, in the case of something like IBM's Innovation Jams, but more often it's an external crowd, something like Procter & Gamble's Open Innovation Initiative or Innocentive I mentioned before. And so I guess there are two things that we see that we think are I'd like you to take away. One is, I think because we're in early days, there sometimes is an idea that this is sort of a dark art or a magic trick almost, that you just sort of unleash it and it happens. And in fact, it's been going on for 10 years. There have been people studying it. We're beginning to get some sense of how this works. We published an article in Sloan Management Review last year where we identified some of the design patterns of these systems. We called it the genome of collective intelligence. There's been some great work done by Scott Cook at Intuit on what they've done and some of the patterns that they've observed. So there's beginning to be an understanding of how this works, and there's ongoing work in this area. And so people who are trying to use it in their organizations should kind of be on top of that. And then the second thing I think that's important to take away is that there are beginning to be, one of the hard things about doing this is you have to be able to collect a community to kind of tap, a crowd to tap. What we're beginning to see is the emergence of companies that will collect that community and then give you access to it. So there's a company called Topcoder in Connecticut that does software development using a contest-based models with a network of 300,000 coders. There's a company called Crowdflower, which is a platform which gives companies access to Amazon's Mechanical Turk, which is a platform where people do small tasks for a few cents up to a few dollars. And so what this allows you to do, we call this crowd computing as opposed to cloud computing. And so what people need to do, I think, in IT organizations is not just think about using the processing and data storage capabilities of the cloud, but also to think about how can we use crowd computing.
Andy, just to piggyback onto that, maybe you want to take people through some of the kind of the core principles of Enterprise 2.0 and then maybe talk a little bit about what you've learned since then?
Yeah, I want to build on stuff that Rob said. We don't need to keep asking ourselves the question, does this stuff work anymore? The evidence is absolutely overwhelming. And along whatever dimension you want to look, that, call it 2.0, call it collective intelligence, call it social media, that this stuff works and that it solves really pressing problems. How many widgets will we sell next quarter? Turns out the best way to get an answer to that is to set up some kind of market mechanism and ask people how many widgets. Ask them to buy and sell securities based on their beliefs about how many widgets are going to be sold next quarter. Is it the best way to generate high-quality encyclopedia articles and build up a knowledge base? That's an interesting question in the world of Wikipedia. Can we use it to modify people's behavior? we actually can. And when you look at how people are influenced by their peers, we're teasing that apart. It turns out peer influence is astonishingly strong and can be facilitated by these group level technologies. It turns out you can get many different flavors of knowledge and insight from the kind of data that these environments spin off. And from a computer scientist point of view, these are really interesting, kind of intellectually challenging pools of data because they're big, and they're kind of shallow, and they're ragged in a lot of ways. Whereas what we've been used to working with, particularly at the enterprise level, is smaller pools of very, very clean, very well-structured data that our ERP systems generate, for example. So there's this weird new pool of shallow, ragged, less structured data. Can you get insight out of that? Absolutely, you can get insight out of that. A couple colleagues of mine at the CDB figured out that a great way to predict housing prices in a part of the country 3 months from now is to look at Google searches related to buying and selling houses or getting a mortgage or finding a real estate broker in that part of the country. Better than the official prediction of the National Association of Realtors, for example. If you want to know how well a Hollywood movie is going to open, or even more difficult, whether it's going to have any staying power or not, look at that big ragged tweet stream that comes out as soon as that movie opens, and you'll have a great idea of how well it's going to do. So does this stuff really work or not question is receding into the rear view mirror actually very quickly as we look at it. That brings up to me a really interesting puzzle, which is why aren't more enterprises jumping all over this? Because when I talk to executive teams and I ask them what they're doing, I get the impression that their toes being dipped in the water, that they might be experimenting with setting up a Facebook page or a Twitter account or doing some sentiment analysis, but has this transformed the way the company thinks about its knowledge resources, about its people? Has it really tried to unleash the power that we see on the web with Web 2.0 and make Enterprise 2.0 a living reality? The answer is really not yet. And the reasons for that, I think, have to do with things like the deep reluctance to give up control in the enterprise, the faith that we have in things like workflow and hierarchy as ways to get things done, this mindset that got instilled in us during the lengthy industrial era of capitalism. It's not the case that all of that is wrong or bad or outdated anymore, but there has been this really deeply interesting alternative that's appeared, and I'm with Rob, just in the last few years as a result of a technology toolkit. And when I look around at what the big established enterprises are doing with this, they are aware of it, they're reacting to it, but the change is coming more slowly than a lot of us enthusiasts would like. What I'm interested in is how do we step on the gas pedal, how do we actually activate the benefits that the 2.0 toolkit can bring and bring them to kind of industrial, to the industrial world.
That's right. Very interesting. I think we were talking about it earlier. When these things first started coming along, I think, Andy, right after your book, and we were talking about what are the motivations for an IT organization to really jump into this, to be, early adopters, let's call them at this point. And one of the things that seemed very obvious at the time was that CIOs and a lot of their deputies just didn't quite know what this was. Is this, like you said, is this setting up a fan page on Facebook? Does that mean that you've just immersed yourself in social media? It just seemed a little too easy, right, to be an answer. Or is this something that you can emulate? A lot of consulting firms do this very well, of turning this, building out their knowledge management tools, using social media to connect the smart people from the West Coast with the smart people from the East Coast, or across different countries who may work on different types of accounts, who may be able to aid each other in new business development or in client relationships. There is this strong knowledge management tool that it could be. But too many companies were saying it's one or the other. We don't even know which one it's going to be. So that was one of the big barriers going ahead. And I think one of the other ones that we discussed is that there's also this sort of this interference that happens from the business, where they think they know what they want to do with it. They get caught up in all the hype, obviously, of what's going on with Facebook and what's going on with LinkedIn and what's going on with Twitter, that they just think that there's got to be an easy solution. Plug something in, and all of a sudden we're rolling. None of that stuff has really happened. I agree completely that we all know it works. And why aren't more people jumping in? I figured we'd ask Rob Stefanik, as the one CIO on the panel, why don't you give us a taste of, from being on the inside, what's your take?
I absolutely agree with what you guys are saying from a corporate perspective for one real reason. We started to look at employee-owned devices. And the first thing that started to happen is, get a call from legal. What's the liability? Then I get a call from communications. Now we need to develop a communications policy and a governance policy around how we're going to do that, as opposed to really looking at the advantage of using some of these tools and trying to allow them to be self-administered. So we've been able to go ahead and get past that. And I think we've done it in a relatively short period of time. To the point of right now, what we're really looking at and have started to do is some crowdsourcing. So basically what we're doing is in the area of corporate communications, as well as in some branding and small component development for some of our portal work. Basically what we're doing is we're now able to go ahead and rather than using whether we're using a selected IT organization or going to a big four firm or whether we're going to a marketing organization to go ahead and do some work for us, we're now able to go ahead and use some crowds that are really specialized. So now we've got, instead of having a group of 50 or perhaps 75 potential developers, now our development pool is up to a couple thousand that we actually have the opportunity to go ahead and bring their work into what we can potentially look at. Now, the one thing I will say, though, that also does bring a whole nother issue to us, and that's quality. Because, again, I believe that once you start to open it up to a larger mass of tools or a larger mass of people, then to ensure that you have a consistent delivery of quality across what's being delivered is a whole nother area that needs to be worked on, and that's really what we're trying to focus on right now. In addition to what we're doing with crowdsourcing, from a BI standpoint, we're starting to work with our automotive division to start to take external information that's relatively available to anybody in the automotive world. It's public domain information. And we're taking that, so basically mashing it up with internal information. So now we have POS information. They're coming directly from our automotive manufacturer, from our automotive makers, as well as our own internal BI tools. And what we're starting to be able to do is take that information, put it together, and start doing some pattern analysis so that we can start doing some predictive information, not only for our own internal sake, but now we can start having conversations with our customers to start showing them how some of these patterns can help them downstream as well. We're relatively new into both spaces within the last 6 months, but I think we're making some good progress, and the business itself is starting to really pick up on the value and the connectivity that, especially from a mashing perspective, the connectivity that now we can offer our customers that really is a linkage that really doesn't exist between us and some potential other suppliers.
That's great. I think I want to jump back into the idea of the benefits, but I think before we're talking about sort of the solutions here, we got to talk a little bit more about the problems, and talk about why the adoption has been a little slow. And I think, Adam, you had a good take on this in terms of, I don't want to put you on the spot because you're in this industry, but I think part of the problem has also been a natural thing where it's hard to measure a lot of the results of what your company's actual investment is going to be here, right?
Absolutely. I'll give you two examples. If you look at some media companies that are clients of ours, they built a whole bunch of tools to take advantage of the collective intelligence of their customers. The problem that they then found was that they didn't have any ability to do anything with the data that was being collected. And so there was no feedback loop to then change the experience that the customers were having. And so, of course, the customers then got unhappy and stopped coming in. And very quickly they found themselves in a death spiral where they invested very significant sums of money in building all of these tools and environment, but there was absolutely no way to take the experience and the data and actually use it. And in many ways, it was very much sort of like a checkbox. We need to do stuff in this area. We've done it, check. My boss will leave me alone. You take another area of clients that we work with in, say, the social games business, and they are entirely different. Their entire business is based on leveraging the intelligence that they gather of how the users behave. One of my favorite stories, this is probably apocryphal, but the biggest guy on the block, they had a board meeting, and one of the board members asked the CEO and said, why haven't you moved the cow, if you've played the game on Facebook, the cow from the left-hand side of the screen to the right-hand side of the screen? Wouldn't that be a better user experience? And the CEO went and looked at one of his flunkies and said, tell me. And he brought out the biggest laptop you've ever seen and banged away on a spreadsheet for a few minutes and came back and said, it'll drop your average revenue per user by 0.1%, boss. And that's the difference. You know, on one hand, an entire business is being built up around leveraging this stuff, and from day one, and then you have other businesses which are legacy, and they have absolutely no way, they don't know how to break the cycle.
Some folk will contribute some energy and some of their bandwidth, and then they notice that nobody's listening to them at all. And as far as I can tell, the only people who like shouting into a void are tourists at the Grand Canyon and the insane. And if you're neither of those categories, you pretty quickly walk away from these environments where it's pretty clear that nobody is listening to you at all. We see way too much of that. The other end that he nails down is a company who has evolved a long way away from this industrial model. And I'm going to assume he's talking about Zynga, which is the company that makes the games that have the cows on Facebook. I've got some exposure to that company as well. And the way that company thinks about its important decisions is bizarre and fantastic, because they have got out of the game of listening to hippos. You know what I'm talking about? This is my new favorite business acronym. A hippo is the highest paid person in the organization. and in the industrial model, where intelligence and crowd-based knowledge was actually hard to come by, it might have made sense to listen to your hippo, because after all, they got to the top because they had a pretty good track record. They had a glittering resume, they went to good schools, they looked good on paper, so you'd sit around and listen to these guys when it came time to make an important decision. When I talk to the Zynga execs, it's not that they are dumb or they don't have glittering resumes, it's that they let the data guide their decisions. So do we move the cow to the right or the left? There's been this fantastic shift where the answer is not, listen to me, I'm a smart guy. The answer is, I don't know, what the heck are the data telling us? And they're relying on some dweeb with a huge laptop next to them to inform that decision, and they're listening to that dweeb. I don't want to compete with that kind of company if I'm in a hippo-based environment.
That's right.
Yeah, exactly.
It strikes me the difference between scientifically scientific approaches to getting stuff done, which is the difference between modern medicine and some guy shake a rattle at you. You know, where are you going to express how help?
Right. Having to think outside of that box a little bit is an interesting concept. One of the other things, I think, talking about barriers that especially CIOs have had is sort of that interference that, oh, I have to do it because some hippo told me to do it. And a number of CIOs, and I don't want to out any of them, none of them are on this panel, but they would say the same type of story would occur to them, or, you know, in their office, where a CFO, a COO, maybe even their CEO, maybe they're on the plane coming back from some trip and they're reading some very high-level magazine like a Business Week or Forbes or Fortune, which, you know, not to knock them because they do jobs very well, but they scratch the surface when it comes to real technology issues like this.
Unlike CIO Insight.
Unlike CIO Insight. I don't work there anymore, but I'll give them a little plug. But, you know, what happens is somebody reads one of these articles and it kind of buys into the buzz a little bit that, oh, social networking, Web 2.0, cloud computing, whatever is the buzzy thing right then and there is the only thing. And that executive comes running over to the CIO, throws the magazine down on their desk and says, where's our Web 2.0? Where's our Web 2.0? Without understanding what Web 2.0 is. It's not, you know, it's not this thing that you can just create. And that a lot of the time leads to that sort of thing, that completely reactive sort of situation where I have to do it because I'm being told I have to do it. So many companies don't have the sort of the feedback mechanisms and the collaboration and the seat at the table for the IT executive to really come and have those innovative people deliver to the executives and say, this is what we should be doing. Here's the way to do it. So Rob, obviously you've been able to successfully sort of maneuver that. What do you think companies need? What sort of thing worked for you at your company in getting the buy-in for this type of thing? And what lessons do you think it can teach other companies in how to go about this?
We took the exact approach that Andy spoke to, which is basically, it's not like representation anymore, it's not being done at a board level. Basically, we're taking the individual contributors, the guys who have these ideas, and asking them to use the data to help make some decisions. And it became very evident in some of the initial proof of concepts that we did specifically around the sourcing model using crowds, it became very evident very quickly that we were able to go ahead and tap a much larger band of resource than we were ever able to do from a business-to-business perspective on the front side. And leveraging that, it really quickly gained us not only the recognition, but the credibility to go ahead and continue to move forward with it.
Mm-hmm. And it seems like, you know, when Rob describes his initiative, you know, there was a business calculus, there was a business value that was perceived. It wasn't just, we need to check the box. And I think that that's a, you know, key issue is you know, just checking the box so we can say we have Web 2.0 is so amorphous, there's not any business value there. If you have a point initiative that is, you know, we're going to get more people in on our software development, you know, that's a very different thing. I think another thing that freaks people out a little bit and that causes resistance and problems is, and I blame the IT evangelists sometimes for this in the kind of open source world, there's a little bit of an ideology of we're throwing the doors open, we're kind of retreating from the uptight, you know, organizational world, and it's a free-for-all. And I think there's some of that ideology that's propounded by people in the open source world and in the kind of collective intelligence world. But in fact, if you look at something like Linux, anybody can contribute an idea or suggest some code, but there is a lockdown group of tight lieutenants around Linus Torvalds who review very carefully everything before they decide what goes in. So there's this combination of opening things up in some parts of the process and then having very tight controls in other parts. And I think if people understood that better, they would be a little bit less freaked out and they would understand that in fact, it's not this dangerous thing that's going to overturn everything, that there are. So, but again, it comes down to getting to the point where you understand exactly how it's done as opposed to like hocus pocus, it's a magic trick. You just sort of, you know, put up this technology and something magical happens. It's really not that. And there are these, in fact, very clear ways that you have places for you know, bringing, you know, kind of the wilder, more creative stuff in, but then you have places where there are control points.
And I think this is going to turn into a deathly boring panel because we're going to strenuously agree with each other up here. I see the exact same pernicious phenomenon among a lot of the zealots that I work with, who kind of want to storm the barricades of the existing corporate world, and they kind of they stand outside and they go, man, hierarchy and management and capitalism are dead, you just don't know it yet. And then the hierarchy and the managers and the capitalists go, well, we're going to hold this off as long as we possibly can, and now listen to these barbarians at the gate. So it's a really bad marketing strategy, in addition to being just dead flat wrong, right? It's absolutely not the case that all flavors of hierarchy are gone in these communities. Some of them are densely hierarchical. They have a management structure. They have things that if you've been a scholar of business for the past half century, you would find very familiar. It's just there are some other things going on which do appear to be novel. They do appear to be technology facilitated. They do appear to be beneficial, and presenting this world as the smart kids who get it versus the pale male and stale guys who don't is a fairly stupid way to proceed here.
Mm-hmm. And kind of along those lines, I think one of the other barriers that we've all heard along the way is just this bureaucratic nature of the way that most organizations can be. And talking about, as you said, all this, you know, we're used to doing this, all this structured data, we know where it is and we like it. Mm-hmm. We have controls over it, we have standards, we have security, we have the whole thing. Now you get this whole thing coming in. And people come up with great ideas. You know, they have great ways to implement how to use these networks, how to tap these communities, how to get something out of it. Throw all the game plans out there. I mean, you know, all the ways that you can use all the data and every way you can possibly measure it. Still, a lot of the time they say, those people, the evangelists, the real go-getters within the organizations, they say, well, I took it to my CIO, and that's, you know, pretty much where it stopped. I'm still waiting to hear back because apparently, you know, governance, risk, and compliance are still kind of important these days. Mm-hmm. You know, I think there's been some headlines lately about, you know, some data breaches and things, which is an ongoing thing, obviously. Every company has to think about this. But too often time, it seemed like the bureaucracy of security, privacy, compliance completely gets in the way. Not necessarily that it's the CIO's fault, but the CIO knows that it's going to be somebody else's, you know, somebody else's problem above them. So you have this old way of doing things that still gets in the way of the new things. But a lot of the time, the IT people themselves can be the roadblock. where they might, where in some cases they can be the real innovator. So, do you think is there anything to that, Adam? I think we talked a little bit about this. Is there?
So, I think the thing that I've seen a lot is that the organization, and certainly my world is more the sort of the consumer side, less the inside the enterprise. But when you look at enterprises who are trying to engage with the consumers and gather this collective intelligence, plug into the social networks, etc., there are sort of two camps that get involved. One is the tech guys, the CIO office, and the other is the marketing guys. And they don't really like each other. The marketing guys don't understand the technology issues, and the technology issues don't really understand the marketing issues. And the marketing guys want it to be there tomorrow because they think it's easy. And the technology guys are looking at a horrendous problem of unstructured data, because if you're a brand, you make this bottle of water, you want to plug into every single social environment out there. You've got all this potential data that you can use to actually move the business forward, from what the label is, the product itself, how you position yourself, etc. They have absolutely no way of leveraging it. Because it's unstructured, it's multiple silos, how do you connect it, etc. And the marketing guys don't work closely with the technology people in order to actually put a plan together where they can restructure the guts of it. So go back to Zynga. If you look at Zynga, roughly about 2 to 3% of their business is what you can see as a consumer. 98% of it is the stuff that you never see. It's all this horrendously complex data management stuff, so that they can go 0.1% ARPU. And until I think enterprises understand this and they can actually agree on why they're doing it, to your point, why are we doing this? What's the point? Is it just to say, oh, we're doing social networking? I think that they'll miss out and be behind.
I do want to open up to questions in a minute, but I think that's also a big issue, is sort of the philosophy behind this. What are we doing? What is this all about? And Rob, you were talking about it as you mentioned BI, which a lot of people kind of use in a different context. But it's sort of the way that you look at it, the way that you're putting this together, and the fact that this really does lead into a form of business intelligence for you. Can you just talk a little bit about that and in the way that you look at it, full circle, and what you think organizations can draw from that?
Sure. I mean, historically, I believe that we've really looked at business intelligence from a reactive perspective. We basically get information and we develop scorecards, and based on those scorecards, people take actions on either KPIs or metrics that are in place. And they're very, very reactive. So the opportunity, I think, that exists, and the discussions and the changes we're making in the organization, is start to be more proactive with the information. So basically, again, and it really stems around pattern analysis, and that is a huge cultural change for us from a data standpoint. We have historically mined data and looked at it, but to really now start to go ahead and put it into patterns so that we can start seeing what we think is going to happen, not only in the next 3 or 4 months, but also next season or year over year, based on historical information, is a very different way for us to look at the data than we've have in the past. So it's a big cultural change within the organization to get people to accept the fact that this data that is not something that it's not tangible yet because it's not something that is a result of what has happened. It's a result of what I'm predicting is going to happen, and that shift is a little difficult for some parts of the organization.
I was just talking to a McKinsey partner who highlighted this exact issue, and he had a great metaphor or an image associated with it. He said, do you think of data as your headlights, your dashboard, or your rear view mirror? And they can be all three, and increasingly we're learning that they can be really, really good headlights for people. I think a lot of organizations still go, hey, that was interesting with the data that they have.
Right. Yeah.
That's great.
Okay. So there's a lot of you here, and I know you braved the way all the way up the stairs to be here. You left the friendly confines of Kresge Auditorium, and we appreciate it.
of their ways.
Our study, groups that had more women did better than any other groups, period.
Shocker, right?
But anyway, I think that the larger point is that there are patterns of communication that are more conducive to intelligent interaction than others. We're just at the beginning of understanding this. Some of you may have seen Sandy Pentland, but some of the work that his lab is doing is also discerning through looking at patterns of interaction with sensors that people wear. So I think we're in early days, but you try to encourage the kind of thing that leads to better, more intelligent interaction.
Okay. Next question.
So it's difficult to defend our supply chains, enterprise supply chains. And I'm wondering if there's any examples where collective intelligence has been used to defend a supply chain, share information, or if there are no examples, what could be some key facilitators to enable collective intelligence to secure some of these complex systems?
I'm not sure what you mean by defend a supply chain.
There's information sharing, lots of data is being collected at different points. Maybe there's a long view one can take by aggregating data to find common behaviors. As you would apply that to a user, maybe you can apply that to a system, kind of in a collective way. Because we live in monocultures in a way when we're defending these complex systems, and it's very difficult to bridge that information together. So maybe there's no example, so I just wanted to see if there was any.
So just in terms of the information being scattered among many different players, is that the issue? That's the challenge?
Value chains and organizations.
Right. I mean, I don't know if you guys have any.
The only thing I was going to comment on was that's really what we're doing from a MASH perspective. I mean, we're really taking our internal supply chain information, so we're basically taking information from our suppliers. We're combining that with direct POS and point-of-sale information from our customers. And then we're mashing that with external marketing information, totally external to our customers and ourselves. It's basically the view of the automotive world from a global perspective, and then it's broken down from by a regional standpoint. And associated with that are predictions. Predictions on how well automotive will do within the second or third quarter within a certain geographic area within the U.S. or a certain geographic area within the world. We are now combining that information to try to help our customers understand and shorten their supply chains. So from a standpoint of saying that we've been able to, for example, with one of our customers who basically requires us to go ahead and maintain N number of days of safety stock, from a supply chain standpoint. We've now been able to show them through some of the pattern analysis that we've done that we really believe that based on these patterns that the amount of safety stock they're requiring us to go ahead and maintain is actually about 20% higher than it should be. And we can validate that with the data. So now they've given us the okay to go ahead and shorten that supply chain, and actually we're giving them a better level of service because now we don't have as much as much material to go through in the same amount of time. Is that what you were, or not really?
Yeah, it's part of measuring risk and understanding risk when your systems are getting attacked, and how do you defend, and how do you share information. So thank you.
Okay.
Thanks.
Hi, I'm Gagan from Akamai Technologies. I have a question about using collective intelligence within the company to really dig up, I would say, the lost pieces of information. Someone builds a cool application, which is available at XYZ URL, but 5 people know it, 3 of them worked on it, so they know it, 2 of them they worked with, they know it, and I have a 2,500 people company. Out of that, maybe 1,000 people can benefit from it, but if I send a formal email, it's going to sit or get deleted. How can we capture, we can, with Facebook and social media in the last few years, we can dig up old pictures, old stories, old, just about anything old, anything, pretty much everything can come up, bubble up. Is there any, do you know of any companies who have done that successfully?
Sure, and there are 2 broad approaches to solving the problem that you identify, which is this organization has massive amounts of resources. Some of them on paper, some of them in code, some of them between the ears of people. How do we inventory those resources and make them available to everybody in the company so we don't be redundant and have to reinvent the wheel all the time? So there are two main approaches there. I'm going to label them bad and good. The bad one is to try to become a librarian of all of those resources, to make people check them in, to make them describe them, to make them catalog them, put them in some kind of taxonomy or content management systems, but which the rest of us are then going to query or navigate through to find our stuff.
And they have been there for a while, right?
Right,
All
and
those
they don't work, right? So that's why I call them bad. The alternative that I really advocate is just build the simplest possible digital environment where you can broadcast your question to an unspecified group of peers. So just build some kind of, you call it a microblogging environment, a Q&A environment, or set up something that looks like Twitter behind the enterprise where you can float either what you know or what you don't. And if someone has a lead to get your question answered, they will retweet it, they'll forward it on, and something will propagate that way. You will eventually get to the person who knows the answer to your question, as opposed to navigating through some taxonomy to find the resource that was hidden there many, many years ago. I saw the most recent example of this working was at Tata Consultancy Services, which has 6 figures of employee based all around the world, primarily in India, and they turned on, in a semi-stealthy way, but with the blessing of the formal organization, they turned on this extremely simple question-ask, question-answer mechanism. They were very smart about it. They put in place some, you probably call them gaming mechanisms, some ways to attract status and to have your reputation ascend in the community and have a leaderboard and all that stuff. They did that, and I thought I was going to hear a horror story about one of these we built it and nobody came situations. And I asked the guy in charge of it, okay, so what happened after you turned it on? He said, well, we had to get a new server after 6 months because the volume of information broke our initial server. And he had his entire team in the room with him, and I thought I was going to have a gotcha moment, so I looked to his team and I said, how many of you have used this system? And they gave me this, well, duh look, and they all raised their hands. It's become part of the circulatory system of the company. So my advice is just get the heck out of the way, stop trying to categorize everything, and build an environment where people can find each other and interact and ask and answer questions. Technically trivial to do, the enterprise level benefits are substantial.
And by the way, I just want to reinforce, adding gaming elements to this stuff is very, very powerful.
Hugely powerful.
Yeah, people will do nearly anything to have a little icon next to their neck. I'm not kidding.
Even if there's no money, there's no reward points, there's nothing else associated except that icon 5 stars next to your name, and when you go down to 4.5, that pisses you off, and you do it.
Absolutely.
We're learning how deeply wired these mechanisms are in people, and failing to take advantage of that is just missing out in a huge way.
And to add to all of our egos, now we have a digital ego. It's kind of creepy, but it's very true.
Great panels and great discussion. My question is actually around adoption, so a lot of the same kind of situations, but I see parallels with about 6 years ago with data, indexing data and being able to find data with the collective intelligence as well. So it took me a long time to actually get the company to adopt enterprise search. They just didn't think it was important until they needed it and they couldn't find something. And then they found once they had a tool that they had, not only did they have it, but they had it in multiple places and they didn't know what version was what and those kind of things. So my question is around more, you've answered some of it with some of the previous questions, but around adoption and enterprise or executive sponsorship and just how to get the business excited, because if they don't know what questions they're going to ask of this collective intelligence or how they're going to use it, they're not going to really allow me to pursue it. So just that's kind of the...
Well, do you have any thought on that?
The only thing I would add, just from a standpoint of baselining it, one of the first things we had to do was, depending on the culture itself, and the culture, if you have a culture of making sure that you always come to the table and always have the answer, that's something you have to overcome first before you really start to open this up. Because otherwise, I believe if you try to just put it in place and you have that culture and you don't deal with the cultural issue first, people aren't going to come and use it because there's a concern that I don't have the answer, I'm not going to ask somebody within, and now who gets to see the information or the question that I'm asking. So that was actually one of the initial baby steps we took, which was basically started to try to change the culture to enhance. We actually ran some internal contests on some questions we were trying to do around internal branding that would actually now kind of just give everybody a comfort zone, that they knew that, hey, everybody doesn't have the right answer, but would like to get your feedback. And then based on that, we just took the next logical step, to now it's okay to walk into the room and say, I don't know, but let me try to find out for you.
Mm-hmm. Awesome, great, thank you.
Can I build on that? Because I think this is just a perennial question here. A couple ways I found helpful to try to get the senior decision makers in an organization on board. The first thing is that the outside world is helping the cause. Because more and more stories appear in the media over time, because they read Fortune on airplanes and there's a story about collective intelligence, because their kids are on Facebook and will not talk to them via any other channel. So the outside world is kind of helping us. I fall back on something Clay Christensen taught me a while back, which is we scholars need to stop dumbing down the stuff that we do and pretending that you all are morons out there. Because he says, in his typically insightful, kind of tourist brilliant way, managers are voracious consumers of theory. And if you give them a way to think about the world and what's going on, they will take that and run with it. He's the master of that. When I was trying to figure out why I thought Facebook would actually be a hugely valuable business tool, I remember what Clay said, and I remembered some papers that I'd read about the strength of weak ties in social networks when I was a doctoral student. Dug those papers up, put them into my book, and just made the point that, look, the people you don't know that well, your weak ties, are massively valuable for you getting stuff done. We suddenly have a set of tools that never existed before that will help you build and maintain and exploit a big network of weak ties. If that theory is right, and it is, this is an incredibly valuable business tool. So I got some traction that way. Studies that come out that attach numbers to things are valuable, case studies are valuable. So we enthusiasts try to triangulate on business decision makers, give them as many different ways as possible to say yes, and calm them down that the reasons to say no are actually not very good reasons.
Okay, we have about 5 minutes left, so we can take one more question. And if anybody else has questions, I would say just come talk to the panel after we're finished. So fire away.
Okay, I'm Phil Ren. I'm from China. I founded my own company 9 years ago. We have been providing the subscription-based business intelligence service. That's kind of like effective, just a database. So as you can imagine, these days we are planning our new type of service based on social things and making our customers to better use our service. You might have heard some company like Asana, Yammer. They are from San Francisco. They build a third-party enterprise social network. It's just a framework. So maybe it seems that you have answered part of my question based on Indian people. That does it work in the US now? That put the just a blank social network within the enterprise and motivate the employees to share the intelligence within the organization. If not, is there any useful methods to motivate them to do that and make our external information more fluent within the organization? I'm not sure if my question clear.
So I think, just following on what we've heard before, the answer is yes. It does work. You need to make it simple. The tool has to be, if it mimics a lot of what the employees are using in the outside world, that helps. Trying to train them with new things is difficult. But I think the answer is yes, it does work. US employees are just like employees in most parts of the world, and they want to succeed.
Yeah, and I would say that if you put in place, and I want to emphasize the simplicity and the intuitive nature of the technologies is critically important. Too many enterprise tools that I've seen are completely opaque, and when I look at the great Web 2.0 examples, they tell me how to use themselves. No one goes to a 4-hour Facebook training session to learn how to use Facebook. So make the technologies incredibly simple. Management needs to lead by example and not generate 40-page compliance policy documents, and then put in the gaming mechanisms, and I would say sit back and watch good things happen. If they don't happen, you have successfully managed to squash all the humanity out of your organization by this point, and shame on you.
All right.
I wasn't going to say that.
probably good somebody did. I think we're gonna have to wrap it up. We're right on time here. So we want to thank everybody for coming out. Hope you enjoyed it. Thought it was pretty interesting.